Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is such a pleasure to work with my good friend Chris. These talks that we're doing there to support Green Shakti, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Green Shakti is based in rural South India. It was founded by Sri Shakti Narayani. It's a nonprofit environmental program that grows and plants trees, over 1.8 million to date, manages 2 tons of waste each day in its zero waste management program, and really educates local school kids in all things about Mother Earth. So it's a collective that is dear to our hearts. And it's just committed to deepening our connection to nature. So these talks are by donation because they are directly benefiting the Green Shakti workers. Due to COVID-19 and massive job loss, each Green Shakti worker is really the only one in their family employed. So we will make sure to include the information for Raisley, Green Shakti, raisley.com, so that if you feel inclined, you can donate to support these incredible workers. So, Chris, it is my pleasure to introduce you. Just a brief bio. Chris grew up on the Gold Coast, Australia. He became a Buddhist monk in his 20s, trained as a somatic psychotherapist, studied Joshin for 10 years on and off in Bhutan, is a devotee of Sri Shakti Narayani in India, and is currently growing biodynamic vegetables and farming in England. And he also makes incredibly beautiful pottery. So Chris is a fabulous meditation expert, therapist, mentor. There was a group of us who worked with Chris weekly in spring, early summer, just as COVID hit. He kindly donated his time for meditation sessions to help us handle all the myriad world stresses that were exacerbated by COVID. So I know that our group is hankering to start again, and we can talk about that. But today we're talking about stressors, triggers, overwhelm, and self-regulation. So Chris, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonya. It's great to be here. It's great to see you and be able to connect with everyone. So this is a great opportunity.
Yeah. So Chris, we're going to do a little bit of a meditation today. We're going to offer some real practical tips on how to deal with some of these triggers, because so many of us are suffering just due to everything that's going on in the world. Chris and I encourage all of you to write in your questions, be bold. Chris is a wealth of information, and we're really happy to answer any burning questions you may have. There are no bad questions. So, Chris, let's just start generally speaking with what's happening in the world and how difficult it is, how pressing, and how stress is affecting everyone's nervous system. What can we do?
Okay, so I think the most powerful point to begin with is, of course, education. We need to understand. And generally now in almost all the world, even in developing parts of the world, we really understand the link between diet, exercise, health, preventative kind of measures that we take to keep ourselves healthy and well. But I think that still it's definitely been growing in the last 10 years, but we still don't really understand, like generally speaking, the link between our nervous system, the state our nervous system is in, and also our biochemical balance, or what I call like a bio buffer. And this is what I think, if I can give some education around that, that's one element. So it's the understanding, of course. And then, as you pointed out, which is something I'm very, very clear about, it has to have a practical basis. It has to work. It has to have a practical series of techniques or exercises, whatever you want to call them, that can deliver results. Now, I grew up in a very beautiful, natural part of the world, but I grew up just naturally with a very high level of anxiety.
Mm.
And I suffered from panic attacks at quite a young age. And I know what it's like to feel highly anxious, what it's like to be very easily triggered. I had a bit of a difficult childhood in some ways, and it left me, especially in my teenage years, quite vulnerable with, let's say, a very highly strung nervous system, a really poor bio buffer. And what I mean by that is that I was in a relative state of stress a lot of the time. And hopefully today we can explore a deeper understanding of what, looking from perhaps the field of meditation, what stress is in a very particular sense relating to the nervous system. And that's what eventually was my downfall, that I ended up with a type of glandular fever, and I ended up with post-viral fatigue.
Hmm.
And that's how I also have a lot of empathy and understanding around this concept of long COVID as well, that and how that can come about is that really we may feel that we're very fit and healthy and strong, but perhaps our nervous system and our biochemical balance and perhaps a backlog of emotional stuff that I sometimes refer to as a bound flow. That if we can sort of become healthy and fit, let's say, on those levels through doing various practices, just as a lot of people do physical exercise to keep their basic level of fitness up, then we can create something that is much more robust and able to deal with the complexity of life, but also events like what we've been going through globally. That just as COVID globally has been a very impacting experience for virtually most everyone in the world, a lot of people personally go through their own personal crisis at some point, whether it's a health crisis, a family crisis, a financial crisis, whatever it may be. It can be equally as impacting and crippling. And again, the more that we're resourced and have these internal kind of assets or objects, things that we have inside ourselves to resource us, we're better equipped to cope. Yeah, so that's sort of what I think in a nutshell around this subject.
Chris, this idea of overwhelm, there's so many of us who can relate to that, and it comes in so many different forms. I think part of the challenge for so many people is to unpack it and to know where to start, how to move beyond paralysis. Can you unpack it for us a bit?
Yeah, no, I'll do my best. So I think that if I share a little bit of a personal story, a professional story, um, I was working in Sydney, and a big part of the focus of my work really involves what I call self-regulation. And this may be a term that you and most people listening are familiar with, and we can explore it a bit deeper and we can practice it today as well.
Super.
And this self-regulation work that I was doing, I had lots of different people coming to see me. I was working clinically as a psychotherapist, but my main approach was coming from the self-regulation. And I had a mature male client, professional from the city, very lovely man, educated. And I didn't know in the beginning when he first came to see me that he'd been seeing a very, very senior doctor of psychology for over a decade, quite a celebrated person in Sydney working in mental health. And we started working together doing the self-regulation. Somehow he'd found out about me. Anyway, he started to become proficient in the practices, and as a result started to shift. And then, unbeknownst to me, he was also still seeing his psychologist. And one day, psychologist kind of went, hang on, like, you've really shifted in the last few months. And he's like, you've been coming to see me for a very long time. There's nothing I'm doing. So what else is going on in your life? And he's like, oh, well, I've been going to see this kind of ex-monk surfer guy, and we've been sitting together. And it was like, and I didn't know, I wasn't privy to this conversation. Anyway, before I knew it, I kept getting more and more phone calls from people saying, because lots of different GPs and other health professionals were referring clients to me, and they'd say, oh, Dr. So-and-so referred me. And then I started getting all of these people calling me going, this doctor has referred me to you. I don't know what you do. He just told me I have to come and see you. And I was like, wow. And a lot of referrals were coming. And then finally this client said, oh, you may have realized you're getting a lot of new referrals from a particular doctor that you may have never heard of. And I said, yeah, that's true. He goes, well, that's because of me. And I think that what that illustrates and highlights here is that when we practice self-regulation, when we learn how to regulate, particularly our nervous system, because when we talk about meditation is such a broad subject. There's so many different ways to meditate. There's all these different interpretations. But if we kind of come back a little bit from that and we talk about relaxation, and maybe that relaxation looks a bit like meditation, but in the classical sense of the word, it's not meditation. It's more of a preliminary practice of regulating our nervous system. Now, normally our nervous system is regulated by our environment. It's regulated by the past, whatever dynamic and environment perhaps that we were raised in. It can also be the kind of body type and personality type that we are. All of these things can kind of inform how our sort of central nervous system, particularly the autonomic nervous system, this automatic part of us that's responsible for our state of being, let's call it, how it shows up. Now, once we start to regulate that and soothe that, calm that right down, get it nice and relaxed and comfortable without even having to really unpack anything. That's the beauty of this to begin with. Because let's say if somebody is in therapy or is, really committed to their own personal development, they may know a lot about themselves, then their family of origin, their narrative, all of this sort of stuff, the things they're struggling with. But then there may be other people who have no idea, and they just know that they're not in a good state. They're feeling very stressed. Their life is a bit of a mess, and they're just going from disaster to disaster, and it's like triage. They're just trying to keep their life on the road. I think the beauty of this is that it doesn't matter what you know or what you don't know. As you start to learn how to regulate, particularly the first stage of working with the body, the nervous system, there are three aspects that I look at applying self-regulation to. The body is primarily the first, the mind, and then the emotions, the feeling self. And we can go into this with a little bit more clarity. But as we start to work with that and calm the nervous system right down, then naturally our levels of, say, serotonin and like that, good biochemicals and neurotransmitters start to kind of become abundant in our system. All of a sudden, we just start to feel a lot better. A little bit like if you've been away on like the most dream holiday you could ever imagine and nothing went wrong and it was an amazing holiday, and then all of a sudden you feel relaxed, your body feels comfortable, your mood is lifted. And so in that way, as we start to work on self-regulation in that sense, then it takes a lot of the intensity out of what's really going on. And then there's a lot of room for that stuff to then be unpacked and worked with. And in the case of that particular client, it was like, as he was less provoked, as he was less stressed, as he was more relaxed, and because he'd been in working with a very skilled therapist for a very long time, he was already super equipped to work with himself. So it's a little bit like it just, as we relax and open, unpacking and working with these things become a lot easier. And not that I've really been privy to this, but I know about it, that in, say, in Canada, there's a program apparently that runs, because I've done a certain amount of research around sort of PTSD,
Mhm.
post-traumatic stress disorder, um, that military personnel that have been exposed to extreme circumstances and have been diagnosed with PTSD, they are basically doing some kind of program where they give them a drug that essentially is a bit like, say, something like MDMA or whatever, and it really floods the body with serotonin.
Mm.
And then they revisit the trauma while the person's in a deeply open, loving, and relaxed state. So that could kind of illustrate in a much more sort of general way what we're aiming to do with this practice of relaxation and
Mhm.
self-regulation. That if we're trying to approach our stuff from a really stressed, tense state where we feel unhappy, uncomfortable, then it in itself can be highly provocative. Just trying to deal with our stuff becomes provocative, and then there's life happening on top of that with all our life responsibilities and so forth. So if we can begin by just calming down, relaxing, and what I call getting back to safe,
Mm.
getting back to safe. And so as we get back to safe, as the nervous system starts to gently shift from that defensive state that we call fight or flight or sympathetic arousal, sympathetic overdrive, which is just basically that the animal part of us, the inner caveman or cavewoman, is very scared and very defensive and is trying to survive and has switched on everything in our system so that we have maximum ability to physically survive in the moment. And I think this is what people really need to understand, that this is what we're working with. That when we have psychological worries, let's say we're thinking about something in the future or something conceptually, like let's say, oh, COVID, and what's the financial cost of all this going to be, and will I have a job in a year's time, or whatever it is that we're thinking about. This part of our body, this nervous system, it can't differentiate between now and in a year's time. It sees everything as an immediate threat, and
Mhm.
all it knows what to do is to respond physically. So it shifts our nervous system, it shifts our behavior, it shifts our biochemical balance. And this often works really strongly against us. And we go literally into a war mode of survival. As we come out of that and drop into the resting state, into the
Mm.
parasympathetic. And while I'm talking to you, you, Sonya, myself, and anyone listening, as we talk about this, we can do it. So it can be done, what I call like be a stealth meditator. People don't even know you're doing it.
Ah,
You don't have to wear a tie-dye shirt or, you know, have some kind of,
you don't have to be an ex-monk surfer guy.
yeah, none of that. And you don't need to have this kind of mystical aura or anything.
Yeah.
You can just be like a regular farmer like me, just, driving around on the tractor. Like when you and I were first talking, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm a bit busy, I can't talk to you. I'm on the farm on a tractor, and I sent you a photo. You're like, yeah, I think I believe you. It's like,
Yeah.
I like this idea that no one really knows. And I think that's really being skillful. And this is the modern approach.
Yeah.
So right now, as we're talking about it, we can practically go there. So as we start to shift and follow my tone, follow the words, as we shift from that heightened state into a resting state, we breathe out and we drop our weight down. And it doesn't have to be exaggerated, it can be very subtle. That all you're doing, as I'm doing it, you're doing it, we're breathing out. Let the belly just soften a bit. Let your body be in gravity, feel heavy. And what this does, our nervous system is super primitive. We call this like our primitive reflex. It doesn't think in dialogue and words, it responds more to feeling. And so as we breathe out and drop our weight down, we're telling our nervous system everything's okay, we're safe. The reality is, most of the things that worry us are not a physical threat in the moment. We live in an incredibly safe world, even though, sure, it doesn't feel very safe. The world is incredibly safe, and we are educated and we generally know how to keep ourselves safe best we can. So in this exact moment right now, there's no tiger hiding behind the couch. There's no physical threat, hopefully, and in 99.9% of the time, in any given moment, we're not physically in danger. So we can actually start to tell the nervous system, you're safe. You're safe. So as we breathe out, drop our weight down, the nervous system maybe for a moment goes, that inner cave woman or caveman kind of goes, oh, maybe I can have a rest. Maybe it's okay right now. And we stop thinking about all the stuff that worries us, all the jobs and tasks that lie ahead of us. We let all of that go for now. You can pick it all up afterwards. And we're just softening. And it's done in small increments. One way to think about the nervous system is like a balloon. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. She loves balloons. And she likes when we blow them up really, really big. And sure enough, you're sitting there eating lunch or dinner, and one of those big balloons just pops, and everyone jumps for a second. It's like, if you're a balloon, how inflated are you? As you breathe out and drop your weight down, let the balloon deflate. Let yourself soften. And as we know, when a balloon is only got a tiny bit of air in it, it's very durable. It's very hard to pop. It can take a lot. And this is what we're essentially doing with our nervous system, doing with our endocrine system, which is all the organs and parts of us responsible for our biochemical balance. So as we're coaching that part of ourselves and softening, you start to feel this switch from activated to resting. The reality is we can almost do everything that we need to do in that resting state. You and I were still able to talk. So we're able to type into a computer, talk on a phone, we're able to drive a car, we're able to do whatever it is that your job entails. We're able to think clearly. We can learn to do those things in a resting state. What we've become confused around is that we think productivity requires fight or flight, that we don't show up fully unless we're all switched on, had a couple of coffees, full of adrenaline, talking a million miles an hour. It's like we've got to learn that we can be highly productive and remain relaxed, and that we're able to show up more and for longer if we're relaxed. And dealing with our stuff, which is even the most probably difficult part of one's life, the more relaxed and resourced we are, the more able we are to be able to face it, to see it, to gently work with it. So that's the beginning of self-regulation. We're tasting it right now. And that's the importance of what you were saying in the beginning. And I completely agree. This has to be a practical process. So what are you noticing now, and where should we go from here?
Well, I think what's amazing is I know I very much feel that relaxation. And I think that when I'm approached, and I imagine when you're approached to talk about the benefits of meditation, what strikes me in what you're saying, Chris, is that this highly essential step is skipped. And I think it seems to me that this is actually the true key to self-regulation and the true key to successful meditative practice. What I would love to see today, and again, I open it up to everyone who's participating, is to show our attendees a daily practical practice that they can apply. It doesn't have to be long. We only have, 30 minutes together, 30 more minutes together. But I feel if people can have a really effective, practical set of instructions to get into that relaxation state. I mean, part of what's incredible about you. There's so much, Chris, that you offer, but I have to say, and we've all discussed this in the past, even when you talk, you're quite hypnotic. What happens when we don't have your hypnotic voice to get us into that really calm, safe space? So maybe for the time we have remaining, and again, please, write your questions in the chat box if you have any. It would be wonderful if we can use this time effectively and leave people with a bit of a toolkit.
Okay. So what I propose then is that I continue to give some information and a bit of a narrative, whilst, as you know from the Sunday meditation groups, as we start to drop down into a deeper state of relaxation. And so in a way it's twofold. You're passively taking on some information whilst engaging in the practice at the same time. And that's really the way I like to work in both my group and individual sessions, because then it becomes this experiential wisdom that you can become that. And I think what's really important, especially anyone who's kind of struggling, or people who are struggling, got to remember, I'm not a natural born meditator, so to speak, and these days people kind of assume that, oh man, this guy must be just like a naturally laid back, surfer guy, and he just naturally fell into it because it's just sort of what his personality and style is. And it's like, no, I actually got into it because I desperately needed it, and I was so far from this state. So this is something that everybody can achieve, and that's my core message is, if I can be relaxed and I can help other people learn to relax, then literally anyone can. It just is a matter of practice. It's about as difficult as learning to ride a bike or drive a car. It's just, the difficult thing is, most of us have not grown up watching people do this. And it's really amazing that when we haven't witnessed it, we don't have as much faith and belief. But because we're kids, we grow up, we watch our parents drive cars, or we watch other kids ride bikes. And I even saw it with my daughter. A friend came around with his son, and he was on a balance bike, and she had one, but she didn't know how to use it. She saw him zooming around. Within a week or two, she's zooming around, because it was like, he can do it, I can do it. And that's why we got to do this together, and why I need to be an example to encourage you all and say, you can be this for yourself.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. By example, definitely.
And to invite each other to meet in this place. So often the way that we are psychologically, if someone comes at us really heightened, speaking really fast, then often we lift ourselves up to meet them because we feel rude not to. What we can start to slowly do is invite the world to drop down and meet us from this place. Nice and calm and relaxed. Then slowly in that practice, so what I would propose is, what we're going to do together is something that can be a regular practice, but also on top of that, something that I'm kind of referring to a bit as like a circuit breaker.
Great.
And the circuit breaker I've called the 1 minute meditation. I've taught, when I used to do a lot of corporate speaking to companies and keynotes and stuff, I would often present this concept of a 1 minute meditation, which sounds absurd. But really all it is a circuit breaker. And that's what we actually have already done together. That relaxation was the 1 minute meditation, where we took ourselves from an activated state. Even if you already felt that you were fairly calm, when you dropped into that deeper state, you realize, oh, I'm a lot more calm now. Or if you're in a really heightened state, maybe you didn't become calm, but it reduced somewhat. And in this way, we don't have to kind of feel like, I've got to achieve a deep state of relaxation, otherwise I've failed. in my circuit breaker or I've failed in my practice. It's like, no, just by engaging the nervous system and coaching it a little bit, even if it doesn't want to budge much, that in itself is really valuable work. And as we're more and more consistent, it'd be like if you expected to just anything that you tried to turn your hand to, that you just got it the first time you tried, that would be an unrealistic expectation. And maybe there'll be some things that you pick up really quickly and other things that you don't. For me, this stuff, meditation, such, so hard. It was something I had to put huge effort into, a lot of practice, and it paid off. And there's not a lot in life that you're guaranteed a result based on the effort you put in. You know, entrepreneurs and such can put a lot of effort into a startup, but they're not guaranteed that they're going to make that fortune or not, you know, and in so many aspects of life, we don't always get a return for our effort. But I really do believe with meditation, if we understand what we're doing, we can get really clear outcomes. Yeah.
I
So
love
this circuit
this circuit
breaker.
breaker. Yeah, this circuit breaker concept is super.
Yeah.
Um, you know, even a question that just kind of came in, you know, the current situation with kids and homeschooling and
Oh,
work and finding a moment, and this idea of, you know, a 1 minute circuit breaker meditation is essential, and life-saving potentially. So
yeah.
so what is it? So here we are, it's
Yep.
Monday, the roof is falling, the kids need the computer, Zoom, blah, you know, stressful elections around the corner. Tell us, what are we going to do? What's this? How do we coach? How do we nudge our nervous system in that moment to relax?
Okay. So the 1 minute meditation is very simply, the first step is regulating the body, particularly the nervous system. And we're going to kind of refer to the nervous system as the inner caveman or cavewoman, right? This instinctual animal part of us that's unreasonable, it's super afraid. And I always kind of jokingly say, we are the descendants of neurotic cavemen and cavewomen, because the ones that were not neurotic got eaten, they fell off cliffs, whatever. So we've got survival instincts so deeply embedded in us. That's how we have survived. And
Mm.
that's how our family line has survived. All of these, like tens of thousands of years going way back, our genetic inheritance that we have, that we need to be grateful for this body. So the first step is that neurotic caveman or cavewoman that's inside you, you need to befriend it and coach it and calm it down. And it
Right,
can go from one of those like really shaky barking little like lap dogs, like a chihuahua or something,
right.
to like a lazy labrador that just is sitting in the corner, and someone walks in, it just kind of raises one eye and just falls back asleep. So we want to work with that part of ourselves. And as I said, like being a stealth meditator, you don't have to lock yourself away in a room, on a mountain, whatever it is, in a monastery. We can live modern life with the demands of work and children and all the rest. And it can be done on the fly. Once we get proficient, we can do this anywhere. So we can use prompts like, every time your bottom touches a seat, whether it's the couch, you know, whether it's the office chair, whether it's the car seat, whenever you sit down, wherever it is, for a split second, check in and ask yourself, if I'm a balloon, how inflated am I? You'll
Mm.
probably realize you're quite inflated, which means your nervous system is heightened. Start to breathe out. And even just for a couple of breaths, split second, just before you turn that key to start the car, or if you're on the bus or wherever you are, sitting in the seat, just before you pick up that phone and make that call or turn on your Zoom, whatever you got to do, just breathe out. And we do it again together now. Just breathe out drop your weight down. And you're not trying to push the air out really fast. You're not trying to do big breaths. It's subtle. It's just giving your body permission. It's just that, just for a moment. Maybe like when you finally get to bed and you just lie down and everything stops for a moment, you go, or you're in a nice warm bath or even a warm shower. Just for a split second, you get a moment to yourself and you can go. And this is when the caveman or cavewoman is running back to their cave, and they get into their cave and they realize, I am safe. Relief. That outward breath, dropping the weight down, is just relief, just giving that primitive reflex permission to come off duty. It's the sentinel. It's always there, always looking out, trying to protect you, keep you safe. It's a caveman, cavewoman. It's a primitive being in a modern world. It doesn't understand all of this complexity. It is freaked out. It is overwhelmed, and it just needs to be given permission to soften, permission to go off duty for a second. So we breathe out and we just use a rhythm. The body responds really well to rhythms. So as we breathe out and gently drop our weight down and just let it become a rhythm, even if the breath is quite shallow and fast, doesn't matter. Whether you're breathing through your nose or your mouth, doesn't matter. Just notice the outward breath and give the outward breath the opportunity to let the balloon deflate, metaphorically. Breathing out, softening. So just for a couple of moments, you're breathing out. Whenever you're waiting, you're in a queue, you're waiting for your Zoom meeting to start, you're waiting for that call, you're waiting for a web page to load. Whatever it is, you're waiting for something, anything. It's another opportunity to breathe out, drop your weight down, and relax. And remember, what we're calling this is getting back to safe. Remember, in this moment right now, I'm not in danger. It's really important to affirm that mentally. Then from there, as you're breathing out and relaxing, if you've got time to go further, you just start to notice your body and any part of your body that you're holding tension. So as you're doing it now, since you are here listening, you've got time, just start to let go of any part of your body that feels tight. It's like unclenching a fist. You're just giving your body permission to soften. We hold a lot of tension in the body unconsciously, unnecessarily. We're just giving it permission to release. Then from there, we can start to look at the mind. And I think about the mind as the adult self, and I think of our emotions and feelings as the inner child. And it's helpful to think of the conceptual mind as an adult and the feeling self as a child. Because let's say if you have a child, or even if you don't have a child and you saw a child on the street, scared, worried, confused, overwhelmed, triggered, would you go over to that child and start freaking out with them? What would happen to that child? The child would freak out even more. We put on a brave face, even if we don't know the answers, even if we don't know everything's going to be okay, and we reassure the child. Now, what happens a lot with our thinking mind, it freaks out with our feeling self, and they collude. They keep recycling feelings and thoughts, and we go round and round and round. And we've got to, again, the circuit breaker. Just stop thinking, come back to safe, and whatever you're feeling, and this feelings happen inside the body, try to be kind, try to be reassuring. And at first, it may not feel that you have great power to impact this inner child and reassure this inner child, but slowly, slowly, just like anyone, you build a relationship over time. It doesn't happen first go. You got to get to know them. And the thing is, with our inner child, it's usually been abandoned a long time ago. We decided feelings are a bit sort of hit and miss. Sometimes I feel happy, sometimes I don't. I'd rather just avoid feeling, and then I can show up more like an adult. Where children, there's a part of us that never grows up. It's always a child.
Mm.
And in those moments, especially our partners get to see that, and we have a tantrum or we have a bit of a freak out or whatever. It's like inside us is always this child, and it needs love, reassurance, and support. So that's what we're starting to slip into. Yeah.
That's beautiful
Basically.
and very practical and makes a lot of sense. And definitely the key is a lot of that kind of self-talk, right? You create the prompts,
And
calm,
it's self-soothing.
self-soothing. Yeah.
Because normally we eat to self-soothe, we do behaviors to self-soothe. A lot of addiction is a pursuit of an attempt to try to self-soothe.
Mm.
But as we learn to directly self-soothe through relaxing and then having this positive narrative towards our feelings and being able to let our feelings come up and accept them. Like when a child wants to share its worries, concerns, we don't just shut them down and say, be happy. It's like, no, okay, yeah, what do you worry about? Okay, but it's going to be all right. And we reassure, we receive and we reassure. And that's kind of this dynamic we need to build. This is the 1 minute meditation. So it's like, I'm freaking out, I'm triggered, I'm worried, I'm overwhelmed. And that's going, okay, the inner child's overwhelmed. First, soothe the nervous system. Then create this narrative with the adult self, put on a brave face and start to reassure the child. And ultimately, the deeper work is really around, and this is the kind of psychological work, working with that inner child, working with that bound flow, these old emotional states that are rattling around inside us that want to be healed, essentially. And as they slowly present, and when we're in circumstances where we're triggered, environments that bring up these feelings that are inside us, we become more and more skilled in giving them room to move through, release, and heal. And that's a really, deeper work there.
That's beautiful, Chris. So we do have a few questions that maybe we can address.
Yep.
So Anton would like to know, how do you deal with the negative thoughts that get triggered and then they continually pop up, even when he notices them from a distance and observes them, lets them go, even from that calm
Yep.
place, they resurface. And is
Yep.
it just a matter, again, as you said, of that practice and self-talk or how would you address those negative thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and I love these kind of questions because they're super relevant, and there are some techniques and practices that we can engage to help that. So when we get stuck in those kind of negative states, what's actually happening is that even though we're trying to relax, I'm trying to do my meditation, and I call them like these kind of frustrated, angry meditators. And we're sitting there and physically we look still, but inside it's just a wild, battle of negativity and the mind, and we're trying to get control. And so therefore we need to quickly go toward the inner child,
Mm.
because usually a lot of these thoughts are manifesting from feelings that we don't want to feel. So in a way, there's kind of like this process where the inner child is feeling something, but we're not aware of what it's feeling. But let's say it employs the thinking mind and says, I don't want to feel this, fix it, find a solution. And then as we start to think, what can I do, whatever, often there are not clear solutions, especially to some really difficult things that we're feeling. If we do come up with some harebrained solution, we think, oh, maybe like a new handbag or a new watch or a new car, or if I lived on a tropical island and there was no COVID, or I didn't have to deal with people, or all of these insane things that come to our mind. Like honestly, if our minds are on loudspeaker, we'd all seem like we're completely nuts. It's like it comes up with these crazy things. It's like a fantasy because it's hoping to escape from what it doesn't want to feel.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, it's like a compass. Whatever direction your mind is trying to take you in those moments, it's trying to escape something. And what we have to slowly do is to realize that what we're trying to escape is a child that is in overwhelm, abandoned, and desperately wants support and love. And we would never do that to a child, but we do it to ourselves all the time. We escape into our thinking mind, we escape into our adult, and we start to think, okay, what can I do in the world or in my life so I don't have to feel this pain? And this is why we abandon the child in the first place, why we split from ourselves. So what you have to realize in that moment where you're really struggling and you're trying to meditate and trying to calm down, oh, wow, there's something I really don't want to feel. And you start to search for it. And you may actually come in contact with it. And when you do, and if you can just bear it for a moment and then apply that relaxation and let that feeling surface. And the reason that we talk about feelings like an inner child is because it's more intuitive and instinctive to be kind and loving to a child when they're angry or sad or scared. If you can realize there's a part inside you that's angry, afraid, scared, hurt, whatever it is, respond with kindness, reassurance, then all of a sudden you may realize you just, boom, drop down into a much deeper state. So usually, yeah, look for what you don't want to feel. That's my advice.
Interesting. Identifying it, I find, is really 75% of the battle. Once you can really hone in onto that, oh, this is the emotion, or this is the problem, or this is what I'm suffering from. There's such an immediate release just from the truth of identification.
But totally, like, and it's not always straightforward. Like, let's use an example of like road rage or something. It's like you're driving, I used to live in Sydney. Sydney's quite an aggressive kind of road kind of culture. And someone cuts in on you in a very aggressive way and it kind of jolts you. And then you feel this immediate anger and you think, screw this person, they endangered me, they're being really rude and inconsiderate, whatever. But when you stop and check, and then like later you're trying to meditate and you're still pissed off about what happened in traffic, which was just like a split second, right? You realize, actually, it scared me. I was afraid. It kind of gave me a shock. And then I jumped straight out of, I didn't want to feel the fear, and I jump into anger and defensiveness. So often a lot of our practice and self-soothing is about grieving. And we have to come out of the anger and go, oh, I felt sad. Why can't people be more kind to each other in the traffic? Why did that person try to drive me into the barrier when we're in merging lanes? It's like, come on, we're all trying to get to wherever we're going. Let's cooperate. And you realize that we suffer a lot from anger and negativity because we're disappointed that the world is not a kinder place. And then also it impacts us and we don't show up in such a kind way because it's all like dog eat dog. Right. And that's why a lot of this self-soothing, ironically, is grieving that has to happen.
That's very poetic and beautiful and honest and quite true. I haven't heard it put that way.
Jack Cornfield's amazing for that. The book A Path with Heart, and he says at some point, to paraphrase him, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's an oldie but a goodie. But A Path with Heart, he says, a lot of meditation practice is primarily a practice of grieving and letting go and forgiveness. And it's true. We've got to forgive ourselves, others. We've got to grieve all those unfelt feelings of dashed expectations and hopes, because life doesn't always go the way we want, and even if you could create the perfect world that you think that would make you happy, it probably won't,
And Bhagya has an important question, and I'm not sure how much we can really touch upon it, but when we deal with deep traumas, right, this 1 minute circuit breaker can only go so far.
Mm.
What are your recommendations, Chris? How do you control feelings? And I think anyone who has experienced trauma, there is a very gnawing loop,
Yeah.
that repeats, and at times when you least expect it, that you can't
So
get out of your cells.
so this, of course, I'm a therapist, and I've done a lot of work, and I've seen a lot of trauma in my work, also in my friendships, in my relationships, in my own life, in my family, and I really relate to it. And there's always varying degrees of severity of trauma that we can carry. And that story that I gave earlier on of when I was introducing the concept of self-regulation, and the doctor of psychology, the celebrated doctor who started referring people to me, the man I was working with had a lot of trauma. And that's why he'd been seeing the psychologist for more than a decade. And that it was actually when he started to practice self-regulation in conjunction with his therapy that he started to shift. And
Right.
just as I talked earlier about that program that apparently happens in Canada with military soldiers and such with PTSD, that the more that we can create that, again, bio buffer, the more that we can produce an abundance of relaxation and good biochemistry. And I know that when we have trauma and we're triggered a lot, it feels like it's one step forward, two steps back. But if we continue to persist, and there is a particular practice that I can just quickly kind of highlight here. It's just a very classical Buddhist practice, and I would recommend looking potentially at Dr. Rick Hanson's The Buddha's Brain, which kind of goes into this a little bit more, and it's a really easy read. And I had the good fortune to meet him in Sydney when he visited, and we talked a little bit around this. And it's basically that we do not reflect enough on the good things that happen. And this is not a guilt trip. This is just simply talking about the way our brain is and how to build this bio buffer. That if we can, like, for example, I was talking to someone the other day, and they said they were in a shop, and it was a heavy thing that they bought, a bunch of bottles, and the guy behind the counter said, "Look, I'll carry it out to your car for you." Just offered. They didn't even ask. And
Mm.
they just felt this gratitude. And often our mind is mixing a lot with what's not right in our world, because it wants to make our world better, make our life better. It wants to problem solve and fix all the problems so we can be happy. And we rob ourselves of the opportunity to dwell and reflect on all the things that are right and good. So this kind of Buddhist practice is that as we consciously sit down and contemplate a really positive narrative that we have some physical memory of. Maybe someone was kind to us. Maybe someone that we love, something happened. We just try to grab something that is feeling positive and nice. And in that moment, as soon as we find the feeling, we let go of the contemplation, and we just place our mind. This is a form of meditation. We place our awareness just with that good feeling. And if that good feeling starts to kind of dissipate, we contemplate again and build it up. Now, it may sound like a difficult thing to do, but we're very good at doing this in the reverse. When we feel negativity and anger, we need to think for a second about that person who pissed us off, and boom, we've got full-blown anger again. As soon as it starts to like dissipate a bit, just think about them again, and boom, it's back again. And we just keep hitting that button, hitting that button, hitting that button. And
Yeah.
we can all of a sudden, and I've seen myself do this when I used to live in Sydney, out of nowhere, I start thinking about that guy in the traffic who just tried to drive me into the barrier. And I was just like, especially when I first moved there, I didn't know the roads. I'm just like, what an asshole. and all of a sudden I'm angry again about something that happened in a split second, like 6-7 hours earlier, and because I've just hit that button. Now we can slowly, because of neuroplasticity and such, we can slowly start to train our mind. And when I was in the monastery, this was a big part of the practice. We were given subjects to contemplate, like gratitude, the kindness of others. And we were taught, just think about the kind. And in the beginning, it feels very flat and very light and not very kind of potent. And you just keep going there. Find something that works for you, whether it's gratitude or love, or that's the essence of, say, bhakti, love of the divine, for example. Just keep contemplating the kindness of the divine or the kindness of others. And as that feeling builds, and what we can slowly do, it's like a dilution, that as that becomes very potent and strong, we can then take that and mix our mind with the trauma for a moment. And it's a little bit tricky at first, and if the trauma starts to pull you deeper into the negative state, let that go and try to contemplate again to the positive. And what this is I offer you a thimble of poison and you drink it, it will kill you. But you say, well, what if I put it into a bucket of water? Then it'll make me sick. And then you say, what if I put it into the swimming pool? It'll make me just a little bit unwell. What if I pour it into the ocean? It won't make me sick at all. So we're essentially building an ocean of positivity that will dilute the negative experience. And this is a long practice, especially as a very deep trauma. It takes time, and we're building something positive, and a little bit like this, Amma has that saying about drawing a line in the sand. If you have this negativity, how do you make it smaller without touching it? You draw a longer line in the sand next to it, and a longer line, and in that way, in comparison, it shrinks. So this is the kind of meditation practice. Hopefully that made sense.
Oh, it made a lot of sense, and incredible imagery. And I think when you put it that way, this idea of diluting it, I think that is really powerful to think about it in those terms. And you have a strong visual that can aid you in minimizing it over time.
Yeah, and I don't take it lightly. Like, if it's a very intense trauma, this requires skill. We need usually support from perhaps professionals, but also on top of that, we have to take responsibility and again think, I can do this. I'm going to build up this reservoir of positivity, and then I'm going to use that. And that's a little bit like what he talks about in the Buddha's brain. I'm going to then use that to dilute this intense negative experience that has really wounded me. Yeah.
There's a quote in the chat box that's so wonderful that touches upon what you were saying, Chris. Nothing can make our life or the lives of other people more beautiful than perpetual kindness. A great Tolstoy quote.
Yeah. And this is where our happiness also dwells, is in gratitude, and as I said, modern humans, we're always trying to problem solve, and as a result, we're mixing our mind often with a lot of problems and negativity. Keep reflecting on the good stuff. Even in COVID, even when everything seems like in your life it's going wrong, actually there's still going to be loads of good things going on. We're just not noticing.
I think it's also important to touch upon this idea of instant gratification and how it has really changed our brains. And, we're all looking for that 1 minute problem solving fix, but actually we do need a bit of inner commitment, to allow this to build, as you say. I think that's really essential, and not be so frustrated if there's not immediate relief.
Yeah, and that's why in the beginning I kind of framed it and said, I'm not a natural born meditator. I suffered from extreme anxiety. I had very difficult childhood in some ways, that really I had a lot of work to do as a young adult. And that's why people have this romantic idea that I went into the monastery because maybe I was like some very aware, spiritually aware being, but it was actually just out of sheer desperation of trying to heal
Mm,
myself.
mm,
And even my study of somatic psychotherapy, all of it has been to try to heal. And we just need to, and this is what I try to instill in people, whether I'm teaching in a group or individual clinical work. You must take responsibility for your own process and be able to think, I can do this and I can build this. It's going to take time and a bit of effort. But let's face it, the amount of effort we put into things like trying to make money or whatever else we do in our lives, if we just put a fraction of that effort into this practice of self-regulation and building this bio buffer, that's what happens. Because just like when you learn to drive a car, first you have to think a lot about it. Later, you just do it. You don't even think anymore. Or ride a bike, you just jump on the bike and off you go. Once you've trained your system in this practice, it just starts to happen in every moment. So while you're looking after the kids or you're working or whatever it is you're doing, it's running in the background and it's just building more and more of a buffer, more and more of a proficiency. And that's the final stage. You have the as I always have said in the meditation groups, you have the relaxation, which is the beginning. You have the meditation, which is the middle of the main practice. Then you have the integration. The integration is, how do you integrate this into your life? As you have trained, then the integration becomes more and more natural. And that's what we're trying to do. But yeah, sure, we live in a fast food culture of just like, I want it now. I can buy it on, my credit card, pay for it later. It's like, no, this is old school. It takes time. We build it, but then it's hardwired and you've got it.
mm.
Yeah.
That's great, Chris. If there aren't any more questions, we'll give people another opportunity as our time, I don't know how it happened, but we're already an hour in, which is so wonderful. So I think what's so interesting about this talk today, Chris, and we've worked together with the group over many weeks, but I'm really excited because I feel you've been able to share real concrete tips that we can all apply in our daily life. It's very practical, something for us to immediately apply, whether it's the self-talk, whether it's the creating of the prompts, whether it's just tuning into the body and unclenching and then addressing the mind. So I want to thank you for this incredibly enriching discussion.
Yeah. No, it's a joy. It's my service, because I've suffered. I know how important it is, these tools, and the more obvious and accessible they are, the better. And just like my website is a free resource with guided meditations, qigong. There's a talk that I'm doing a couple of years ago to a bank in Australia, one of the top banks in Australia.
Mhm.
I've got a SoundCloud thing, and it's been a busy time. We've got a newborn, our second child, a farm. It's just been so much,
Yeah,
but I'm going to expand the SoundCloud and put more and more free stuff on there so that people can just go
amazing.
use it, because I feel this is the birthright of every human, is that we need free access to this stuff so
Mhm.
that we can heal ourselves and show up in the world in a better way. And if we're overwhelmed, stressed out, triggered, swamped by our traumas, then how can we really serve the world? And that's why we need people who champion this and inspire us. And I hope that there's some inspiration. And please also know, I'm not claiming that I'm perfect. I'm not claiming that I'm someone who's mastered all this stuff. I'm very much in this process myself, and that's why, as a brother, as a friend, I can encourage others and say, walk together. Let's move in this direction together. There's so much inertia pushing us towards negativity and fear and confusion, but we have to, and this is the whole concept of community or sangha. We
Mm,
come together and we inspire each other and go, yeah, just keep going. Just pick yourself up and practice again. And even if you sat there and you couldn't muster up any gratitude, or you just found that you were just fighting with this negativity in your mind, just try again. Even the act of doing it is incredibly positive. You know, I invite you, I encourage you, and I will do whatever I can to help people to practice this, and I will continue to practice for the rest of this life. And
thank you,
encourage
Chris.
you all to do that too.
Yeah, your website is in the chat box, so everyone can reference it. I think this is a beautiful note to end on. We're all so grateful for your wisdom and generosity. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and for wanting, as Chris says, to show up better in the world, right? That's really important. Thank you, everyone. Please support Green Shakti workers. They need you. And Chris will be updating us on his plans, and we'll be in touch. And thank you, Chris. Again, thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you, Sonya. Thanks, Green Shakti.